welcome to an Assassin's Creed video. This is Assassin's Creed Atlas, Maps, Battlegrounds, and Architecture of the Assassin Brotherhood. And this is a book that just released about a week ago. So obviously I ordered it because I love Assassin's Creed and everything that has to go with it. So let's go into it and see what there is to see. Abrams, New York. And this is from, I can't pronounce the name, but Guillaume de Lalande, maybe? I don't know, not good. So there's a ton of stuff to look at here in this book. You have Europe, you have Paris, London, and then in Asia and the Middle East you have Egypt, the Levant, Constantinople, and China. And then in the Americas you have the Caribbean, American colonies, on the seas and beyond the Animus, and then interviews. So the preface. History, an endless adventure. We all have a defining story, indelible ink inscribed on vellum. He reminds us of who we are and explains our daily choices and decisions. Among those who lived long before us, only a few, either by luck or the power of their destinies, have been accessible to us through their writings, art, or genius, such as Herodotus or Leonardo da Vinci. Today we experience many of these figures and their particular eras through dusty, monochromatic images, and this often leads to misunderstandings about them. But we must remember that these people and places of yesteryear existed in a living context. Their worlds were colorful, full of smells and noises. Archaeology, by revealing a tiny part of the grandiose historical sites around the world, allows us to fantasize about eras we can never relive. Great stories have been unearthed, revealing conflicts settled by words or by the sword, but their universal themes of family, love, or a sense of duty transcend time. For as long as I can remember, I have been fascinated by this past. My curiosity led me to want to go and meet up with it. First, it was historically inspired comic strips that fascinated me with their stories and their ability to transport me to worlds I was discovering for the first time. Eventually, historical films and video games instilled in me a desire to know more and more, and they naturally led me to study history at university. During my studies, I discovered a revolutionary game which became the model of the video game world. It was 2007, and Ubisoft Montreal was following up the Prince of Persia games with the very first Assassin's Creed game. While I was deep into my studies and research with my eyes glued to my books, I dreamed about this video game's potential, one which could provide a tangible context to history. Since being hired at Ubisoft in 2010, this dream has blossomed into reality with each new project, whether it's the famous AAA games or multi-platform storytelling which deepen the experience. The greatest strength of the Assassin's Creed game series is not its ability to help us rediscover the past, but rather to offer incredible potential to nurture that which is most human in us. The thirst for curiosity, exploration, and freedom. This atlas you hold in your hands, which summarizes several of humanity's greatest moments and the saga of Assassin's Creed, is also a new page in this ongoing story to which millions of fans around the world continue to contribute. Your enthusiasm and commitment motivate development teams to continually improve. It is through your passion that we can live ours. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. And this is Maxine Durand, historian and director of content for Ubisoft Montreal. So, Introduction. A journey through time, across continents, and over oceans. Assassin's Creed makes history its playground. To support the historical credibility of this adventure, through the ages, countless artists have worked to faithfully recreate the places visited, from Jerusalem to the time of the Crusades, to the Paris of the French Revolution, and through Florence amid the Renaissance. These places are more than just settings. They are characters in their own right, as iconic as the heroes. Lush jungles, endless deserts, seas full of unexpected resources, majestic cities, these spaces are where humanity has decided to live as communities, where civilizations have formed, and where power struggles are played out. More and more, these locations appear vibrant and alive on screen, thanks to technological advances, and the soul of these places, through architecture and monuments, is transcribed in the most honest way possible. The artists who work on Assassin's Creed have spent months, even years, building digital versions of humanity's greatest monuments. Among the many is the Cathedral of Notre de Paris, which was created by a single artist who dedicated 2 years of his life to it. This atlas also exists as a tribute to them. From the Arctic Ocean to Egypt, from the Caribbean to China, and from Europe to North America, Assassin's Creed takes us on a journey through the time and across the entire planet. Have a nice trip. When memory fades, myths persist. 75,000 years ago, a planetary catastrophe struck Earth, and as a result, many species vanished. Whether caused by the explosion of a supervolcano or the aftermath of a solar flare of extraordinary magnitude, the entire planet was shaken to its core. Natural selection and evolution, however, have allowed humankind to see the light of day. In the mythology of Assassin's Creed, Adam and Eve are among the survivors. However, they are not creatures of an almighty God, but those of a civilization that created humanity from pre-existing primates for the sole purpose of having an exploitable workforce. These are the Isu, also known as the first civilization, or those who came before. They were not gods, but more highly evolved beings. From a biological perspective, for example, their DNA was composed of 3 helix, and they possessed senses of which man was deprived. The Isu have created various artifacts of various shapes: apples, staves, shrouds, crystal skulls, weapons, each endowed with seemingly supernatural powers. In reality, these powers are just the result of extremely advanced technology. Some were specifically designed to subject humanity to the will of the Isu. This was the case for a long time. Crossbreeding between humans and Isu gave rise to hybrids, on which these artifacts became inoperative. Adam and Eve are 2 of these hybrids. Having become aware of their plight, they decided to launch a revolt against the Isu. Many assassins are descendants of these hybrids, giving them the ability to use these artifacts, as well as lost senses such as eagle vision. A great war broke out between these 2 civilizations and wreaked enormous havoc. Blinded by this conflict, few saw the catastrophe looming, a solar flare dangerously threatening Earth. 3 wise Isu, Jupiter, Minerva, and Juno, built temples and tried to save the planet through numerous experiments, but none of these prevented the catastrophe. Minerva's calculations predicted that a new cataclysm would hit the Earth in 2012. She recorded messages to inform listeners in the distant future. Centuries have passed and the memory of the Isu has faded. They have been confused with ancient gods and goddesses. Humanity has developed and colonized the planet, but the artifacts created by the Isu are still here, hidden, and their power over most of humanity has remained intact. Throughout history, some have tried to seize this power, forming clans around 2 major trends of thought. One believes that humanity must be guided to reach its full potential: the cult of Cosmos, the Order of the Ancients, the Templars, and finally their modern successors, Abstergo Industries. The other emphasizes free will and freedom as the building blocks of humanity: Adam and Eve, the Hidden Ones, and the various brotherhoods of assassins around the world. These 2 factions have endured through the centuries in many forms and names. There were attempts at rapprochement, unforeseen exploits, and great purges on both sides. The means used by both at times at odds with the ideology each defends are sources of defections and profound questioning. Sometimes in the light, often in the shadows, this confrontation is the cause of many historical upheavals. The Crusades were launched to recover artifacts from the Holy Land. The American Revolution marks the defeat of the Templars, and the French Revolution is revenge and the sign of an assured Templar victory. Kings, emperors, popes thus possessed certain artifacts and were able to consolidate their power. In the shadows, the assassins tried to retrieve them. Today, the control of the modern Templars is carried out through global capitalism and the submission of politics to economic power. Modern assassins, reduced to a few dozen in the world, attempt to open the eyes of humanity and be the first to find the artifacts. This fight is centuries old. It continues today. So here's Europe. We have Greece. Temples, caves, sacred ruins, mythical beasts, and forgotten legends. The Greek islands are abundant with wonderful secrets. The cradle of Western civilization, Athens, is in the 5th century BC, practiced the first form of democracy under the leadership of politicians such as Pericles. The Peloponnesian War, lasting for more than 25 years between Sparta, Athens, and their respective allies, ignited the entire region. Sacrificed by their adoptive father on the orders of the Pythia from the Sanctuary of Delphi, Cassandra and Alexios, the grandchildren of the legendary king of Sparta, Leonidas, are at the center of a true Greek tragedy. Both survived the fall from Mount Taygetus, and both will become valiant warriors. In search of her mother, Cassandra fights against the cult of Cosmos, who manipulate the economy and politics from the shadows, and whose most violent member is none other than her brother Alexios. Cassandra finally takes possession of the Staff of Hermes, which will keep her alive until present day. So here it shows Cassandra and Alexios were the grandchildren of the legendary king of Sparta, Leonidas. This giant statue stands over his tomb, and ancient temples and statues were often decorated in bright colors. Acropolis. The Acropolis is the heart of Athens. It's the highest point in the city. Boats arriving from afar can be seen, and the giant statue of Athena Nike marked the entrance to this site, built to worship the city's protective goddess. Behind the statue stands the Pantheon, a temple built on the orders of Pericles. In 429, while on his way to make offerings during the epidemic ravaging the city, Pericles dies under the blows of Alexios. And here it shows, at 512 feet high, the hill has long served as a natural citadel. Down here, the Pantheon also held the gold of Athens and of the city-state members of the Delian League, who will denounce Pericles' wastefulness in beautifying his city. According to mythology, the goddess Athena and the god Poseidon clashed on the Acropolis for control of Attica. Poseidon, god of the seas, used his trident to produce a saltwater spring. Athena, goddess of wisdom and military strategy, offered an olive tree. It was Athena who was selected as the winner by those who became the Athenians. The Acropolis has suffered many sieges throughout history, notably by the Ottomans and the Venetians. Ottomans, by the way. The Venetians bombed the Pantheon in 1687 and left it in the state of ruin we see today. This is Pink's Hill. The Pinks, where one stands shoulder to shoulder, is the most important site in Athenian democratic life. This is the place where the People's Assembly, the Ecclesia, meets to make major decisions, voting by a show of hands about budgets and laws to elect magistrates, and decide upon the members of the Boule and the Hilala. Located west of Acropolis, the Pinks overlooks the Agora, another famous site in Athenian daily life. And it could be pronounced Agora, I forget. It might be Agora, the more I think about it. Here it says the assembly of Athenian citizens gathered on Pink's Hill. This was the place of verbal sparring, reminiscent of the attempt by Cassandra and Socrates to convince the Athenians to vote against Cleon. And here, decisions were made by a show of hands. Considered the father of Athenian democracy, Pericles, a great orator, ruled the city for more than 30 years. His love for Aspasia would prove fatal to him. I want to make sure that I didn't miss anything here, but I don't think I did. No. Sparta. Located in the lands of Laconia, Sparta was a city known for its formidable army. From an early age, young boys were trained to become fierce warriors whose courage was recognized throughout the ancient world. Even today, people talk about the legendary Battle of Thermopylae, where Leonidas, king of Sparta, and his personal guard of 300 men valiantly fought Persian invaders to the death. To counter the growing influence of the Athenian-led Delian League, Sparta created the Peloponnesian League. The two forces clashed for nearly 30 years to impose their supremacy over the Greek world. Sparta's final victory over Athens marked the end of the golden age of ancient Greece. And up here, at the center of Spartan rituals, the twin gods Castor and Pollux stood as symbols of a youth focused on sports and physical training. And down here, General Nikolos, Miriam, Cassandra, and her younger brother Alexios, a united family soon to be torn apart by the cult of Cosmos. Chosen by the cult of Cosmos, the Pythia was installed in a hall of the Temple of Apollo and spoke in the name of the god. Her prophecies were highly respected in the Greek world. The Pythia took her name from a monstrous python that terrorized the region. It was the god Apollo himself who killed the python. The inhabitants built a sanctuary here in his honor. Delphi. Mount Parnassus in Phoenix is the setting for the Sanctuary of Delphi. Only 9 days a year, pilgrims from all over Greece amassed there to consult the Pythia, the oracle of Apollo, whose influence and prophecies were undisputed. Corrupted by the cult of Cosmos, the Pythia aligns her visions according to the wills and needs of the cult. It was through her that the cult tried to dissuade Leonidas from attacking the Later, it was Leonidas' daughter, Miriam, whom the cult attacked during a family pilgrimage to Delphi. The oracle tells her that her daughter Cassandra is promised a great future, but that her son, Alexios, an infant at the time, will cause the fall of Sparta. Alexios was then thrown from the top of Mount Tygot by his father Nicholas. Next page, the Sanctuary of Delphi in the 5th century BC. So this is the Sanctuary of Delphi. All right, now we have Italy. Here, Ezio in his hometown of Florence, and then here, the recreated city of Rome. Each point indicates the duration of time spent by a player. The Colosseum can be clearly seen in the center. In the 15th century, Florence was the center of the Renaissance. It is in this Tuscan city on the banks of the Arno where the wisdom of the ancients is rediscovered and where the greatest artists find generous patronage through the Medici family. Art, science, architecture, the country's intellectual vibrancy leads to the creation of the banking system and an explosion of trade. Italy was then divided into multiple duchies, and many rival families fought fierce battles to take power. From Florence to Venice to Rome, the Borgia family gradually expands its power. Rodrigo, Grand Master of the Templar Order, becomes Pope in 1492 and takes possession of an apple and staff of Eden, which when joined together permits the opening of the Vatican vault. With the help of his friend, the genius Leonardo da Vinci, the assassin Ezio Auditore will destroy the Borgia's influence and hide the apple of Eden in the Colosseum vault, where it will be recovered by Desmond Miles in 2012. So here's Florence. For Ezio Auditore, everything begins and ends in Florence. Coming from a family of Florentine bankers, he joins the assassins to avenge his father and brothers, who were executed by the Templars. His journey takes him to Venice, Rome, Constantinople, and Masyaf. He dies peacefully from old age in 1524 on a bench in front of the iconic Basilica di Santa Maria del Fiore. And here it shows Leonardo da Vinci was a friend of the Auditore family. He will decode for Ezio the pages of Altair's Codex. And then here it shows Santa Maria del Fiore is the heart of Florence. The construction of its iconic dome in 1436 marked the beginning of Renaissance architecture. It will remain the tallest dome monument in the world until the 19th century. Monteregioni, which was the headquarters, I believe. It is not far from Siena, Tuscany, in the village of Monteregioni, where Domenico Auditore chose to settle. He had a large villa renovated to serve as a house, fortress, and training ground. Domenico had Altair's armor in the sanctuary under the villa. His great-great-grandson Ezio will access it thanks to the 6 seals of the tombs of the assassins scattered throughout Italy. The villa was severely damaged by Caesar Borgia's armies during the siege of January 2nd, 1500. And here it shows the largest architectural work of the Roman Empire and capable of accommodating up to 50,000 spectators. The Colosseum is a mere ruin in the 16th century, right down here. Can't really see based on where the book is, but see if I can, there you go. Alright, so then we have Rome. When Ezio arrives in Rome in 1500, the former imperial capital is nothing more than a field of abandoned ruins. It is the nearby Vatican that houses all the riches and where the true seat of power is held. It is also one of the few places on the planet with such a high concentration of temples of the Isu civilization. There are at least 3, the Colosseum, the Vatican, and the Pythagorean. And here Caesar Borgia is the illegitimate son of Rodrigo Borgia, who became pope and entrusted Caesar with the leadership of the Vatican's armies. Caesar does not hesitate to kill anyone who gets in his way of the apple of Eden he covets, including his father. Got the Vatican. At the seat of Christian power, the Vatican is at the center of many intrigues. In 1492, the Templars took control when Rodrigo Borgia became pope under the name Alexander VI. Just as St. Peter's Basilica was built on the site of the crucifixion of the Apostle of Christ, the Sistine Chapel was built above a vault of Isu civilization. Entry to the vault is unlocked only if an apple of Eden is added to the top of the papal staff, which Rodrigo Borgia was about to do when he was stopped by Ezio Auditore. Here in 1501, Ezio infiltrated the Castel St. Angelo to free Caterina Sforza, who was captured after the siege of Monteregioni. And here the Apple of Eden projects an image of the planet's great protective temples. Here's Venice. In the 15th century, Venice was a great commercial and maritime power, and arguably the richest city in the world. After missing their chance to take power in Florence, the Templars, led by Rodrigo Borgia, attempt to gain control of the city's doges. In reality, however, this is a subterfuge to divert the assassins' attention from the Templars' voyage to Cyprus. On the occasion of the carnival in 1486, thanks to the golden mask he had acquired, Ezio Auditore infiltrates the private ball of the Doge Marco Barbragio and eliminates him with a bullet from the pistol embedded in his hidden blade. We have Paris. The news of the capture of the Bastille resonated around the world. On July 14, 1789, indebted by the 7 Years' War and its involvement in the American Revolution, one of the oldest monarchies in Europe was about to be overthrown by a people who were ardent supporters of the ideas of the Enlightenment. In the shadows of Paris, more than in Versailles, the true power struggles play out. Within the Templar Order, as in the Brotherhood, groups divide in the face of impending political change. They will stop at nothing, with moderates calling for unity and extremists ready to kill even within their own camp. From Notre Dame de Paris to Sainte-Chapelle, assassin Arnaud Dorian runs along the rooftops of Paris and through its catacombs in search of personal redemption, during which he will find his childhood love, the Templar Elise de la Sierre. Since the Middle Ages, Paris has held many treasures. One of them, the Sword of Eden, which belonged to Jacques de Molay, rests in a temple under the headquarters of the Templars. The other, an Apple of Eden, resides in a temple in Franchiside beneath the Basilica of Saint Denis. Both will be retrieved by Arnaud Dorian. And here, on the next page, it says the 2 jewels in the heart of Paris, the Sainte-Chapelle and Notre Dame de Paris. And here they are right here. See if I can zoom out a little. There you go. That might help. Oh, well, that's not good. These pages are stuck together and this just ripped. I'm not a fan of that. That's terrible. Right here it ripped. Well, Bastille. Built as a fortress during the 100 Years' War, the Bastille was eventually used as a prison. Though little used, there were only 7 prisoners being held there in 1789. Nevertheless, it remained a symbol of the absolute power of the king. Its attack by the people of Paris on July 14, 1789, was the first strong signal of the beginning of the French Revolution. Wrongly imprisoned for the murder of his adoptive father, Arnaud Dorian discovered his assassin origins alongside Pierre Belloc, an assassin who was searching for traces of the Issue in the fortress. Both were able to escape the Bastille during the July 14th offensive, and Arnaud made his first leap of faith. And here it shows the demolition of the Bastille took only a few months, and most of its stones were used to build the Point de la Concorde, the bridge which now connects Place de la Concorde, the large square of the same name, to the National Assembly. Here's Versailles. Versailles began as a small hunting lodge before being transformed into a luxurious chateau by the Sun King Louis XIV, who settled there, forcing his court to follow him. The symbol of the absolutism of the French monarchy, the Palace of Versailles, was ravaged and looted by the revolutionaries. On his way to Versailles, Charles Dorian, Arnaud's father, was assassinated by the Templar Chez Cormac in order to reclaim a precursor box. 13 years later, it was also in the courtyard of the chateau where Francois de la Sierre, Arnaud's adoptive father, was assassinated. In both cases, Arnaud was the tragic witness to these murders and will carry the blame for many years. Here it shows the royal courtyard of the Palace of Versailles. We have Sainte-Chapelle, and up top it says, after discovering that Belloc had betrayed the Brotherhood by killing Mirabeau, Arnaud eliminated his mentor in an epic duel under flashes of lightning. Belloc's body is buried under Sainte-Chapelle. 13th century Gothic royal chapel, Sainte-Chapelle, was built by the Order of St. Louis to house the relics of Christ, including the Holy Crown of Thorns. Built in just 7 years, its huge stained glass windows make it one for the architectural gems of Paris. The chapel houses a complex mechanism which reveals a secret entrance to the underground headquarters of the Paris Brotherhood of the Assassins. It is on the roof of the chapel where the duel between Arnaud Dorian and his mentor Pierre Belloc takes place. And then here it says a secret hatchway to the Assassins' headquarters hidden within Sainte-Chapelle. Café Theatre. But before that, the money raised in renovated cafes across Paris helped to embellish the Café Theatre. In 1791, the Paris Brotherhood tasked Arnaud Dorian with the renovation of the Café Theatre. It quickly became the place of intellectual debates and theatrical performances, as it had been a few decades before, and served as a meeting place of the assassins until long after the French Revolution. Arnaud lived in the adjoining house and enjoyed the most beautiful view of Notre Dame de Paris from its windows. Notre Dame. When its spire burned on April 15, 2019, the whole world was in shock. Notre Dame de Paris is more than a jewel of Gothic architecture. It's the sanctuary of the Holy Crown of Thorns, the site of Napoleon's coronation, and the place of refuge for Victor Hugo's Quasimodo. The cathedral is at the heart of French history. During the Revolution, it was disintegrated and served as a place to store wine barrels. Arnaud Dorian will discover under the cathedral a secret laboratory used by the alchemist Nicolas Flamel. And we have London. As the capital of the British Empire, London during the 19th century was the beating heart of the global industrial revolution. When twins Evie and Jacob Fry landed there in 1868, the city was under the tyrannical control of the Templar captain of industry Crawford Starrick. London then witnessed an explosion of poverty fueled by rural exodus and rampant capitalism, which ignored working conditions and social well-being. A fog of industrial pollution would continually float over the city to its horizon. London is home to many treasures, such as the Shroud of Eden, hidden a century earlier by former pirate Edward Kenway, who became co-leader of the British Brotherhood with assassin Miko. From St. Paul's Cathedral to Buckingham Palace to the banks of the Thames to Big Ben, the Fry twins wipe out the influence of the Templars and save Queen Victoria from a coup. So here's St. Paul's. From the top of St. Paul's Great Cross, the whole of London can be observed. The fifth cathedral built on the site, the version standing today, was constructed after the Great Fire of 1666, which devastated the British capital. This monument contains a secret chamber as its summit. While on the trail for the Shroud of Eden, Evie Fry received a necklace there before engaging in a memorable battle against Templar Lucy Thorne. And here it shows St. Paul's Cathedral has no less than 125 bells. The architect Christopher Wren is said to have hidden diamonds given to him by the Queen within the structure of its dome. Here's Buckingham. Completed in 1830, Buckingham Palace has been the residence of English sovereigns since Queen Victoria. It was Victoria's husband, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, who built the vault under the palace in order to protect the Shroud of Eden brought back to London by Edward Kenway. In 1868, during a garden party hosted by the Queen, Jacob and Evie Fry eliminated Grand Templar Master Crawford Starrick, who had just laid his hands on the artifact. The twins will be ennobled by Victoria for this act. Here's Westminster, and here it shows officially named Elizabeth Tower in honor of Queen Elizabeth II. Big Ben was ascended by the twins on 2 occasions, to repair telegraph lines and to defuse explosive planted by a Templar. Coronations, weddings, funerals. Westminster Abbey hosts all the great ceremonies of the British royal family. Along with Big Ben, located just a few yards from it, it is one of London's most iconic buildings. Westminster serves not only as the burial place of several British rulers, but also of several great thinkers, including Charles Darwin, Isaac Newton, and more recently Stephen Hawking. According to a theory supported by some historians, Napoleon also rests here. The body, which was returned to France and interred at Les Invalides, was reportedly exchanged so that the emperor would remain in anonymity, a prisoner of the British crown. In 1868, Harrison Harley, a member of the Blighters gang, planned to destroy the abbey. Tasked by Sergeant Aberline with Harrison's arrest, the Fry twins have apprehended Harrison near the abbey and handed him over to the authorities. Here's Thames. It's better to cross the River Thames by jumping from one boat to another. Thames is mainly a river route used for commerce of vital importance to the rise of the United Kingdom. It was better to take a boat than to swim across the River Thames. In the 19th century, in addition to pollution from the industries along its banks, the river running through London was an essential trade route and a veritable highway for myriad boats. The Thames Tunnel opened in 1843 and became a hideout for prostitutes and drug dealers. It was once the headquarters of assassin Gallaudet District, also known as Sir Henry Green, future husband of Evie Fry. We have trains. The Industrial Revolution of the 19th century began with the steam engine. One of its most spectacular applications was the train. This new means of transport completely changed the perception of time and distance. To be perfectly elusive, the Fry twins set up their headquarters on a constantly moving train in London. A red engine train carries passengers through London. It is called the Great Edge 1191, a tribute to the assassin Altair and the beginnings of his quest in 1191. Here it shows, although the first locomotives had top speeds of 16 miles, 25 kilometers per hour, some models of the 19th century reached 75 miles per hour. Mind the fall. Waterloo, Cannon Street, King's Cross, London Bridge, Charing Cross, and Victoria, which is here. Each of these 6 stations is an architectural tribute to the glory of rail travel. You have Russia. In the 19th century, the Russian assassin made it their priority to bring down the autocratic regime of the Tsar, allied with the Templars. Assassin Nikolai Orlov twice attempted to retrieve the scepter of the Tsar, in actuality a Staff of Eden. Both attempts resulted in a disaster. The Borky train disaster in 1888 and the Tunguska explosion in 1908. The revolutions of February and October 1917 forced Tsar Nicholas II to abdicate and carry the Bolsheviks, supported by the assassins, to power. At odds with the excess and terrorist methods used, Orlov broke away from the Brotherhood. However, he agreed to a final mission to recover the precursor box from the hands of the royal family. Horrified by the murder of the Tsar's children, he decides to save Duchess Anastasia, leaves Russia for the United States. And here it shows, disappointed by certain extreme means used by the assassins, Nikolai Orlov decided to leave the Russian Brotherhood and move to the United States in 1918. All right, we have Chapter 2 now, Asia and the Middle East. Egypt. The young Ptolemy XIII and his sister Cleopatra VII are the last of the Greek Ptolemaic dynasty at the head of Egypt in the 1st century BC. Cleopatra will make an alliance with Julius Caesar to regain her throne, but Egypt will fall under Roman rule. Devastated by the murder of his son, the Magi, protector of the pharaoh, Bayek goes in search of revenge. From the oasis in Siwa to the splendid Alexandria, he discovers that the Order of the Ancients is manipulating politics in the shadows and is about to acquire powerful Isu artifacts. Bayek and his wife Aya dedicate their lives to fighting these enemies of free will through the First Brotherhood, referred to as the Hidden Ones. Tens of thousands of years ago, Egypt was a rich breeding ground for the Isu civilization, and they erected many temples there. The Pyramid of Giza, built around 2580 BC, is thus located above a large complex in which an Isu left behind a message for the inhabitants of the 21st century. Here it says, from 305 BC, the Ptolemaic dynasty, originating from Macedonia, brought the standard codes of Greek architecture to Egypt. We have the Siwa Oasis. Due to its remoteness in the desert, the village of Siwa was not transformed by the Greeks. The local Magi Bayek prevents the Order of the Ancients from entering the Temple of Amun as the price for his son's life. He will do anything to avenge the murder of his child. And here it shows Siwa's existence as a village in the desert is thanks to the presence of a large oasis. Alexandria. Named as an eternal tribute to its founder, Alexander the Great, Alexandria was founded in 331 BC west of the Nile Delta on the shores of the Mediterranean. Alexandria's location quickly made it the trading center of the world and a required passage for any commerce. Since Ptolemy I, Alexandria was the capital of ancient Egypt and was considered by all to be the era's intellectual seat. Its legendary library housed under one roof the most important works of the time, as many as 700,000 documents from the ancient past up through the time of Julius Caesar. Its destruction between 48 BC and AD 642, the circumstances of which are still unknown, is arguably the most significant loss of knowledge in the history of mankind. As a commercial, political, and intellectual hub, Alexandria quickly became the busiest city of antiquity. Its population of nearly 500,000 was extremely cosmopolitan. Down here it shows, considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the Lighthouse of Alexandria guided sailors for nearly a millennium. It was almost entirely destroyed in 1303 from tidal waves and successive earthquakes. And then here, Alexander, founder of the city, rests in a golden sarcophagus. Right over there. I think it's Cyrene or Crene, or I forget how you pronounce it. It was the Oracle of Delphi who sent Greeks to colonize this lush site located on the coast of present-day Libya. A disciple of Socrates, Aristippus, founded a school of philosophy here, and the city quickly became the Athens of Africa. In 49 BC, under Roman rule, the city was ruled by Flavius Metellus, one of the leaders of the Order of the Ancients and possessor of an apple of Eden. Seeking revenge on the men responsible for his son's death, Bayek arrived to eliminate the governor in his fort and took possession of the apple. Here's Giza. In Cleopatra's time, the Great Pyramids had already existed for more than 2,500 years. This is a longer period of time than separates the present day from her era. The pyramids remain mysterious structures. This necropolis of the kings of Egypt, located not far from Memphis, the capital of Egypt at the time, was home to the tomb of Khufu within the largest period. In 48 BC, Bayek pursued Gallaudet, a member of the Order of the Ancients. 2 years later, he stopped a priest posing as the resurrected Ibis before he could enter the Isu temple. And then here, at 241 feet high, the Sphinx of Giza is the largest architectural monolithic sculpture in the world. According to the most recent scientific theories, its 20,000 tons of limestone rock represent the pharaoh Khufu, whose great pyramid stands next to it. A series of tunnels lurk under the statue, and thanks to them, Bayek was able to reach a temple of the Isu civilization and then hear a message recorded 109 days after the Great Catastrophe. The Levant. In 1191, the Levant was a powder keg. As the cradle of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, this zone of the Middle East precipitates both spiritual and worldly power struggles. The Third Crusade is the occasion for a direct confrontation between the Templars and the Assassins. Officially launched to liberate holy sites, the Crusades allowed the secret Templar order to move closer to an apple of Eden hidden in the ruins of Solomon's Temple in Jerusalem. The Levantine Brotherhood of Assassins, however, take possession of it. Located in western Syria near Jerusalem, Damascus, and Acre, the fortress of Masayef serves as the Brotherhood's headquarters, from which they openly control the territory. Altair ibn Ma'ahad will lead the Brotherhood following his former mentor's betrayal. Convinced that the Assassin's Creed should be disseminated throughout the world, he writes a codex which he gives to Marco Polo's father. In 1257, the Mongols take control of the fortress, and Altair locks himself in his library with an apple of Eden. Both were found centuries later by the Florentine Ezio Auditore. So here we have Jerusalem. In the 12th century, the Assassins and the Templars confronted one another in Jerusalem. In 1191, Grandmaster Robert de Sabe infiltrated Solomon's temple to retrieve an apple of Eden. He was stopped by the assassins, but during the encounter, assassin Altair's passion and eagerness were almost fatal to the operation. The assassin was made to repent by eliminating several targets to the Holy Land. And here it shows the Dome of the Rock, built on the Temple Mount, is located above the ruins of Solomon's temple. You got Damascus. Following its conquer by Saladin in 1174, Damascus remained relatively untouched by fighting. The Urniad Mosque, surrounded by its 3 minarets, is considered the 4th holiest place in Islam. Altair paid many visits to Damascus, once to eliminate 4 prominent members of the Templar Order. Aesthetically, each city is characterized by a principal color. In Damascus, warm colors dominate. Down here, with fortresses and cathedrals in the prayer style of the European Middle Ages, Acre's architecture fully reflects the origins of its inhabitants. Here's Acre right here. Acre was a city of strategic importance during the Crusades, particularly because of its port. In 1190, King Richard the Lionheart of England held the city under siege and attempted to poison the entire population. This plan was undermined by Altair, but the city fell to the Templars the following year. It served as the capital for the Europeans until the end of the Crusades. The fortress of Masayef. Perched atop a mountain, this assassin's lair is suggestive of an eagle's nest. Until the siege of the Mongols in 1257, the fortress was the headquarters of the Levantine Brotherhood. After being betrayed by Al-Mu'alam, Altair provided new direction and sent many of the faithful to spread the creed around the world. 3 centuries later, Ezio Auditore returned to Masayef and was able to enter the library where Altair had died, holding in his hands one last message. Constantinople. The only city in the world that straddles 2 continents, Constantinople is a formidable crossroads between the West and the East. Its conquest in 1453 by the Ottomans and the fall of the Byzantine Empire marked the end of the Middle Ages and the beginning of the Renaissance. It was the beginning of a very cultural era and the establishment of great religious tolerance. Its location on the Bosphorus Strait makes it a thriving capital at the center of world trade. However, from the Imperial Palace to the Tower of Gallaudet through the Constantine and Bayous districts, its neighborhoods have distinct economic and social differences. Driven by a years-long thirst for revenge, the mentor of the Italian Brotherhood, Ezio Auditore, sets out in search of meaning and decides to follow in the footsteps of the former mentor of the Levantine Brotherhood, Altair ibn Ma'ahad. In Constantinople, Ezio meets his future wife, Sophia Sartor, who runs a bookstore not far from Hagia Sophia. The shop served as an outpost for the local brotherhood founded by the Polo brothers, who had also hidden in the city the keys needed to open Altair's library. And down here it shows at the crossroads between East and West, Constantinople is the perfect metaphor for the meeting place over the centuries between Altair and Ezio. Bayous District. With the presence of the Arsenal Harbor, the Bayous District is the commercial center of Constantinople. It is also in this area that the Forum of the Ox, Forum Bovis, was built by the Romans. It was below this forum in 1511 where Ezio found one of the keys to Masayef hidden by Niccolo Polo. And here it shows in this rather affluent district the buildings may be built 2 or 3 stories high. Hagia Sophia. Built under the orders of Emperor Justinian I in 537, the Orthodox Basilica Hagia Sophia was converted into a mosque under the name Hagia Sophia Kami upon the arrival of the Ottomans in 1453. Though its initial design was first inspired by the Pantheon in Rome, its different influences led to the new style referred to as Byzantine. In 1511, Ezio Auditore discovers the secret passages there, which lead to the hidden tomb of the Ottoman general Ishtak Pasha. It is also in the shadow of the mosque where he spends his first romantic date with the woman who would become his wife, Sophia, sort of. In the Constantine District. Constantine is the poorest district in the capital. The wooden dwellings were very unstable and the roofs form a mismatched collection. There are, however, remnants of past Roman glory, such as the Valens Aqueduct built in the 4th century. It was a major source of fresh water in the city, originating from the Belgrade Forest 25 miles north of the city. Gallaudet District. Located on the other side of the Golden Horn, Gallaudet is the most cosmopolitan district within the city. There are buildings with Greek, Byzantine, Ottoman, and even Italian architecture. It was the Venetians who in 1348 built a great tower dominating the district and making up part of a large defensive complex destroyed by the Ottomans. One of the keys to Masyaf is hidden inside. Ezio was not the only one to have parachuted from the top of the tower. In 1632, Hezarfen Ahmed Salibi soared for a little more than 1.5 miles from the tower to the Asian shore beyond Bosphorus thanks to the glider he had fashioned. Religious leaders convinced the Sultan that this was the work of a demon, and the aviation pioneer was exiled. One of Istanbul's airports is now named after him. Imperial District. Marble buildings and sumptuous mosques, including the famous Hagia Sophia, make up the bulk of this district. A jewel among these riches is the Topkapi Palace, serving as a residence of the sultans from the time it was built by Mehmed II in 1459 onward. China. The only survivor of the Chinese Brotherhood, Xiao Jun, leaves in 1524 to ask for the help of the mentor Ezio Auditore in Florence. She returns to her country more motivated than ever to take revenge. Nearly 40 years later, she succeeds in poisoning the emperor, an ally of the Templars, and eventually restores the Brotherhood. Xiao Jun was an expert in martial arts. She could eliminate her enemies with a kick from the blades attached to her shoes. India. The Koh-i-Noor is at the center of the battle between the assassins and the Templars in India. This extremely powerful artifact is in the form of an enormous diamond. In 1841, amid a conflict between the Sikh Empire and the British India Company, assassin Arbaz Mir retrieves the artifact while protecting his mentor and his beloved Princess Pyra Kaur. We got Chapter 3, the Americas. We have the Caribbean. The Spanish, British, French, Portuguese, and Dutch, all the European powers, rushed to the Caribbean to exploit its precious natural resources and gold. Large-scale looting took place, facilitated by the displacement of millions of slaves from Africa. The beginnings of the 18th century was a golden age for pirates in the region, with the creation of the Republic of Pirates on the island of Nassau, their first attempt at modern democracy. Edward Kenway, seeking fame and fortune since his Welsh campaign, took part in the conflict between the Mayan assassins and the Templars settled in Havana. He discovered a piece of Eden in the form of a crystal skull in the Mayan Temple in Jamaica. Edward turned the small island of Great Inugua into a haven for pirates, then entrusted it to the local assassins. He refounded the British Brotherhood in London upon his return to the United States. And here it shows in the Caribbean adventures take place primarily on the seas. And then here, after the defeat of Napoleon's armies in 1804, Haiti became the world's first independent black republic and the only sovereign nation in history founded on the success of a slave revolt. At another world first, slavery was also abolished. And at first Spanish, Haiti became French in 1697. Haiti, a colony of the Kingdom of France. Haiti was the center of triangular trade, bringing slaves from Africa to work in sugarcane plantations. In 1735, after his adventures with Edward Kenway, the former slave-turned-assassin Attaway helped the local population rise up in revolt. The city was hit by numerous devastating earthquakes. The one on November 11, 1751, was caused by a mechanism of an Isu temple triggered accidentally by assassin Vendredi. Kingston. Here it shows a large windmill on a hill overlooks the city of Kingston. Kingston is the British colonial capital of the island of Jamaica. The white paint of its mansions catches the eye of the visitor. Thanks to its fortifications and its protective bay, Kingston is a vital city connecting the Caribbean, Africa, and Europe. Following the War of the Spanish Succession, many privateers were abandoned by their countries and they settled in Jamaica to become pirates. In 1721, the pirate-turned-assassin Edward Kenway posed as an Italian diplomat and infiltrated a party hosted by Templar Governor Woodes Rogers before eliminating him. Nassau. In 1715, Blackbeard, James Kidd, and Benjamin Hornigold founded the Republic of Pirates and chose Nassau as their refuge. This attempt at an anarchic republic did not last long, as just 3 years later, British Governor Woodes Rogers regained control of the island with an extremely effective blockade. Here it shows an iconic element of the city of Nassau, the Queen's Staircase, with its 65 steps, was not built until 1794, so Edward Kenway could not have climbed them. Havana, the capital of Cuba, centralized by the Spanish presence of the Caribbean. It quickly became the largest and richest port in the Caribbean. Since 1708, the city has been ruled by the Templar Grand Master Lorenzo Torres y Ayala. The Cathedral of Havana is undoubtedly the most iconic element of the city. Great Inugua. In 1715, after the assassination of the French Templar Julien de Casse, Edward Kenway took possession of the island of Great Inugua and made it his general headquarters for 7 years. He significantly improved the facilities, making them into a new refuge for pirates after the British regained control of Nassau. In the Templar manner, there is an extremely strong black armor that require 5 keys to acquire. And here it shows Edward Kenway spent a great deal of money renovating the manor, which served as his general headquarters. American colonies. The first large-scale global conflict, the 7 Years' War, was partly fought in the British and French colonies of North America. The British Haytham Kenway took the opportunity to create the American Rite of the Templar Order and accomplished a near total elimination of the local assassins. To eliminate supposed allies of the French in 1760, the young George Washington gave orders to burn down the small Mohawk village of Kennethaston, whose inhabitants protected the entrance to the Grand Temple of the Isu civilization. The young Ranatoken, the secret son of Haytham Kenway, lost his mother and eventually joined the manor of Achilles Davenport, a former assassin mentor. Similar to the ideals of freedom of the American Revolution, Ranatoken was driven above all else by his desire to protect his people. From Boston to New York, he met all the great names of American independence. He hid the key to the Grand Temple in his homestead, where it would be found by Desmond Miles in 2012. And here it shows, attracted by its wealth, the European powers flocked to colonize the New World. Davenport Homestead. The Davenport Homestead served as the base for the American Brotherhood of Assassins. Composed of a large manor house and numerous outbuildings, mentor Achilles Davenport moved there in 1746. However, the Great Purge, led by the Templars, left Achilles and the homestead in total ruin. It is only with the arrival of the young Ranatoken that life gradually resumed. Farmers, merchants, priests, and a community settled in, fulfilling Achilles' wish to create an example of what the American nation could become. In 1783, Ranatoken placed the amulet key of the Grand Temple in the grave of Achilles' son Connor. It was found by Desmond in 2012. Here it shows the ship Aquila is anchored nearby in the bay of the estate. Abandoned for years, it requires serious repairs. We have Boston. The old State House was the seat of the Massachusetts state government from 1713 to 1798. From the 1770 revolt in front of the old State House to the Boston Tea Party uprising 3 years later, the young Ranatoken witnessed the first moments of the American Revolution in the Massachusetts capital. It was again in Boston in 1775 that the assassin helped the revolutionary Paul Revere before his heroic ride, and in 1782 came upon the tracks of Charles Lee, who became Grand Master after the death of Haytham Kenway. The frontier. Spread over several northern states of the British colonies, the frontier was gradually settled by hunters and merchants. It is home to many Mohawk villages, including the one of Ranatoken. And up here it says, despite its sometimes peaceful appearance, the frontier forest is home to wild and ferocious beasts. Mayan temples. Often built above Isu temples, Mayan temples and pyramids are venerable strong boxes difficult to penetrate. Tulum, the general headquarters of the assassins, hides a temple which opens only with keys recovered from throughout the Caribbean. In 1715, Edward came upon armor made from metals from the first civilization. In 1772, Aveline de Grand Paris was able to enter the temple hidden under the pyramid of Chichen Itza to find the prophecy disc. In 1774, Ranatoken found the sword of William Kidd in the ruins of Cerros Belize. No fewer than 3 different assassins have visited the Mayan ruins. Louisiana Bayou. The mentor Gate had set up his residence in a tree in the middle of the bayou. A swampy region bordering New Orleans, the bayou is an important communication route for trade, whose control is coveted by many. but that is not so easily accomplished. Watch out for crocodiles and other wild beasts. New Orleans. Explorers arrived in the area in 1690 and founded New Orleans. Thanks to its location on the Mississippi, it soon became an important economic center. The daughter of a black slave and a wealthy French merchant, Aveline de Grandpré, put an end to the influence of the Templars by eliminating the Grand Master, who turned out to be her stepmother, Madeleine de Lisle. New York. During the American Revolution, New York was a stronghold of the British Army. It was among the last of their enclaves to fall. Ratontoken was almost executed in front of the city hall, but he was saved by his father, Templar Grand Master Hatham Kenway. The two men met one last time in 1781 at Fort George. Hatham was killed by his son. And here, built in 1776, St. Paul's Chapel is still in use today. And over here, a forest of windmills cover the northern region of Manhattan Island. Chapter 4, On the Seas. We have Greek seas. The Athenians long dominated the Greek seas, their main point of strength during the conflict with Sparta. Knowing how to navigate the seas is naturally an essential skill in an empire with dozens of remote islands. Combat trains could hold 170 rowers among 3 tiers. Their agility allowed complex ramming maneuvers supported by the bronze mount on the bows. These were history's first real naval battles. In 480, the Greeks repelled Persian attacks with a fleet of 350 triremes. Cassandra was able to travel across the Greek world aboard the Idestria. This great trireme destroyed many ships commanded by pirates or members of the cult of Cosmos. The Arctic Ocean. In March 1760, Templars Hatham Kenway and Shay Cormac crossed the icy waters of the Arctic Ocean to stop the assassins from finding and activating seismic temples capable of wreaking havoc on the planet. The Arctic Ocean was one of the sites of conflict between France and Britain during the 7 Years' War, and explorers have long sought a supposed passage which could link the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans from the north. In 1776, this passage was visited by Ratontoken while in search of the treasure of William Kidd. Here it says, for sailors falling into the icy water meant certain death. Sea routes could change significantly as glaciers changed shape. We have the Caribbean Sea. The odds of victory were directly related to the number of guns carried on deck. The conflicts of the European nations have spread to every sea, including those of the Caribbean colonies. Abandoned by their kingdoms after the War of the Spanish Succession, many privateers became pirates in 1715. The sinking of the fleet, bringing innumerable treasures back to Spain, resulted in many missions involving its salvage. It was during the sinking of this fleet when Edward Kenway and Adewale escaped from the galleys where they were held prisoner. They stole the only ship to survive the hurricane, the Jackdaw, which now waved the pirate black flag. Atlantic Ocean. Built in Brest, France in 1749 by the French assassins, the Aquila was sent to America to help the American Brotherhood. Under the skillful and quick command of assassin Robert Faulkner, the ship gained a reputation as the ghost of the North Seas. In 1768, it was virtually destroyed in an ambush by the Templars. Its wreck remains anchored in the bay of the Davenport Homestead until Ratontoken and Faulkner give it a second life. In Chapter 5, Beyond the Animals. Abstergo Industries. Abstergo Industries is a multinational organization with branches in many business sectors including medicine, entertainment, finance, and sports. It is the armed extension for activities of the Templar Order during the 20th century. Founded in 1937, its executives included Henry Ford and Thomas Edison. Its goal? World domination through the control of capitalism and scientific progress. Here it shows, after his abduction in New York, Desmond Miles was transported to this Abstergo building in Rome, where he was forced to relive the memories of his ancestors Altair and Ezio. The deciphering of the genome and the discovery of genetic memory allowed Abstergo to create the Animus, a machine capable of regenerating the memories of ancestors, some very distant. The Historical Research Division was tasked with finding both known and unknown historical figures who may have come into contact with powerful artifacts, and if so, capturing a current descendant so that his genetic memory could reveal valuable secrets. In 2016, while presenting the Apple of Eden to the Templars, Abstergo's CEO Alan Ricken was killed by assassin Callum Lynch. Abstergo Entertainment. Entertainment pacifies and controls the masses. This Abstergo subsidiary serves primarily as a propaganda tool, utilizing virtual reality experiences, video games, and movies. The objective is to allow players to relive the past through the eyes of an assassin, although the way history is depicted is not necessarily the reality. Following the disappearance of director Oliver Garneau during a trip to Chicago, Templar Melanie LeMay took over the company. She had to urgently track down a hacker who turned out to be John Standish, a sage and the reincarnation of the husband of the Isu goddess Juno, who would try to reincarnate Juno using Abstergo servers. Here it shows Abstergo Entertainment's first production was based on the life of assassin Aveline de Grand Prairie. And here the interior of the building looks more like a lush jungle in perfect harmony with the Caribbean game which was being developed at this time. Montreal. The economic capital of Quebec, a true global center of the video game industry, was chosen as the headquarters of Abstergo Entertainment. No resident of Montreal could ignore the huge sail-shaped tower at the heart of the city. In its basement is hidden a cathedral of computer servers used for, among other things, analyzing data from the DNA of Subject 17, Desmond Miles. It is from this data where analysts look for historical clues about Isu artifacts and also prepare sequences that will be edited to create video games and movies. The Animus. The Animus is a device that permits the regeneration of genetic memories inherited from distant ancestors. Made possible by the study of artifacts left by the Isu civilization, this technology is the work of Dr. Warren Vidic. Various tests in the 1980s allowed Vidic to gather information about great assassins such as Aveline de Grand Prairie and Nikolai Orlov, often to the detriment of the mental health and sometimes the very life of the subject placed in the machine. The bleeding effect, the confusion of memories between the past and present, a recurring problem of this technology, whose risk is only temporarily reduced by the injection of certain substances. Here it shows, while the memory is being loaded, the white room allows the user to take control of his avatar. The Animus comes in many forms, including consumer products such as Brahmin VR virtual reality headsets. In 2002, Abstergo built Animus machines en masse, notably in its subsidiaries in Philadelphia and Rome. It was in Rome where Desmond Miles was abducted and forcibly placed in the machine to regenerate the memories of his assassin ancestors and find clues to new artifacts. For their benefit, the assassins recovered a copy of the plans for this technology at an early stage and developed their own machines in parallel, sometimes more advanced, as the assassin Rebecca Crane claims. Former Abstergo employee Layla Hassan developed an even more advanced version, allowing her to explore the memories of proto-assassins in the time of ancient Greece and Cleopatra. The first stable version of the Animus dates from the 1980s and was created by Dr. Warren Vidic. And here it shows the ship that serves as a refuge for modern assassins is named Altair, in tribute to the famous Levantine assassin. Modern Brotherhood. At the turn of the year 2000, the Templars launched the Great Purge against the assassins, even managing to eliminate the Mentor thanks to Daniel Cross. The few survivors, including William Miles, Desmond's father, had to go into even deeper hiding. Modern assassins compensated for a certain lack of means with a highly developed motivation and sense of resourcefulness. They were thus able to make their own Animus. Regularly trained, they were able to free Desmond from Abstergo's premises in Rome. They were also able to count on a few defections of former Abstergo employees, such as the young Layla Hassan, who, feeling inadequately recognized by her superiors, decided to seek out valuable artifacts on her own before being persuaded by William Miles to join the assassins. Thanks to their custom versions, the assassins were also able to regenerate genetic memories. The Arctic. The seismic temple of the Arctic, like those of Lisbon and Haiti, was probably built by the Isu as a defense for the planet. These temples play a role in stabilizing the Earth's crust. Conversely, if they are disturbed, they can trigger very violent earthquakes. This is what happened when the assassins sought to appropriate these temples. Faced with the impressive number of deaths caused by the Lisbon earthquake, which he triggered, assassin Shay Cormac turned away from the creed and joined the Templars. And here it shows touching the artifact of a seismic temple will suddenly trigger an earthquake of rare violence. The Great Catastrophe. The Great Catastrophe arrived from far away. It was caused by a solar flare of unprecedented magnitude. Preoccupied with squashing the human rebellion, the Isu did not notice the coming of the Great Catastrophe in time. In 75,000 BC, a massive eruption of solar matter in space created magnetic currents of incredible force, threatening Earth and all its inhabitants. Several sages, including Jupiter, Minerva, and Juno, tried to create protection systems, but their efforts failed, and almost all the Isu disappeared in the disaster, leaving the field open to the few surviving humans. Anticipating an identical disaster in the year 2012, some Isu left messages which were seen by Desmond during review of his ancestors' memories. His final sacrifice in the Grand Temple saved the planet from a second mass extinction. And here it shows solar winds destroyed almost all of humanity and only a few Isu survived. The Grand Temple. The Grand Temple needs 3 generators to operate. They are recovered by the assassins in New York, Brazil, and Egypt. Desmond's sacrifice in the Grand Temple saved humanity, but also freed the evil Juneau from her prison. As part of the planet's defense systems against the solar winds, the Isu created and installed a system of protective temples. Even though they were not enough to save the Isu, they were of paramount importance to those who came after. The main temple, built in upstate New York, was the subject of much attention in 2012. Both assassins and Templars dreamed of controlling it, but this required an apple of Eden and an amulet. It was in order to find these 2 artifacts that Desmond delved back into the memories of his ancestors Altair, Ezio, and Renatoken. In the Grand Temple, Desmond was repeatedly challenged by Juno, an Isu entity imprisoned there by Minerva and Jupiter due to her hatred of humanity. But Juno had planned everything. The activation of the planetary protection system by Desmond in 2012 caused her release. Atlantis. After the success of the Anthropos project, which created a docile and exploitable humankind, Juno and her husband Eta left for the city of Atlantis. Despite their formal ban by Poseidon, they carried out various experiments on humanity, giving life to hybrid creatures such as sphinxes, minotaurs, and cyclopses. In the 5th century BC, Cassandra discovered the sunken city. Pythagoras then handed her the Staff of Hermes, a powerful artifact granting, among other things, immortality. She passed it on to Layla Hassan some 2,500 years later. The tombs. Whether exposed for all to see, like the tombs of Alexander the Great in Alexandria, or hidden in the desert like the tombs of the pharaohs, the resting places of the great rulers are overflowing with treasures and powerful artifacts. Most of Egypt's great tombs are built above a temple of the Isu civilization. During his visits, Bayek triggered many messages recorded by the Isu shortly after the Great Catastrophe. The Roman temples. Before the catastrophe in 75,000 BC, Minerva recorded messages to Desmond, with Ezio being a means of communication through time. Rome is another location containing a substantial number of temples created by the Isu. The most important one is found under the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican. After the battle with Pope Rodrigo Borgia, assassin Ezio Auditore joined the papal staff with his apple of Eden to open the vault. He then communicated with Minerva, who through him sent a message to Desmond in 2012 so that he could save the planet from another catastrophe. The Temple of Juneau is located under the Basilica de Santa Maria in Ara Colle. You must pass through a secret passage under the Colosseum to get there. The assassin Ezio Auditore hid his apple of Eden there. The Observatory. Hidden deep within the Jamaican jungle, the natives fiercely guard against its entrance, following instructions left by an unknown sage. Located near Long Bay in Jamaica, this Isu temple allows the user to spy on anyone around the globe, provided you possess a few drops of their blood. This capability was the focus of the Templars and Assassins' attention in the 18th century. To work, a cube containing the blood of the person being observed had to be inserted into a crystal skull, which would then project live what the person was seeing. This ability was first used by pirates Bartholomew Roberts and Edward Kenway. When the Grand Templar Master Lariano Torres work, he set off a powerful security system. Edward was able to eliminate the Templar, but it was the Mayan mentor Atabai who was able to disable the system. The assassins then decided to permanently seal the entrance to the observatory. At the heart of the surveillance system is a crystal skull. Used in conjunction with another skull, it can also serve as an impregnable communication system. And then the last part of this is interviews with Maxine Durand, who's the historian and director of content at Ubisoft Montreal. How do you choose the historical periods you will explore? All of our teams are made up of professionals who are fans of either video games, history, or both. The creative directors and producers have certain desires for periods they want to explore. Of course, the historical period must be part of the mythology developed by the saga itself. These are often periods of intense conflict between supporters of a certain order with an aspiration for freedom, such as the American and French Revolutions. These are moments when the battles between the Assassins and the Templars can develop. The choice of location is just as important. The video game allows the creation of a unique experience. The Assassin's Creed saga is a kind of historical tourism, a total immersion, and is virtually limitless. Here players can meet historical figures and walk in and among the monuments. Each period and destination must encourage travel and exploration. Sometimes the choice is guided by technological developments. The Naval Navigation system that we had developed for Assassin's Creed 3 opened up a lot of perspectives, including the possibility of making a game where the naval aspect could dominate, giving rise to Black Flag, the great piracy simulation in the Caribbean. Are some historical periods easier than others? Each period has its strengths and weaknesses. The further back you go, the less sources, photos, or visual evidence you have. With ancient Egypt, although the sand has preserved things well, the colors are no longer there. As for more recent times, there are more documents, sometimes too many, which can limit artistic interpretation. There are also national resonance. In the case of the American and French revolutions, we were dealing with the stories of the founding of nations, which do not necessarily have the same meaning in other cultures and countries. We do a lot of research in the interest of detail because we know that there is a certain expectation of us. In the case of Assassin's Creed 3, for example, we really took to care to respect these ingenious peoples and the historical truths of the people mentioned. Some players may not like it when it's shown that George Washington launched a genocide against Native Americans, but it is a historical reality that we wanted to show. It has obviously not been very popular in the United States, but it's a choice one makes. What are the liberties you take with history? It becomes a question of credibility. There are cases where it is easier to play with historical truths. The temples and statues in Odyssey have color applied to them, and we now have scientific evidence that this was the case, even though this was unknown until 200 years ago. Strangely, it is less shocking to do this than if we were to replace the historically accurate colors of the facade of Notre Dame de Paris. The Sphinx in Origins was already 3,000 years old at the time of the game. It had been restored in the time of Cleopatra many times. We searched for the most precise detail possible, but we had to do a lot of tests with the colors to find something satisfactory. We are so used to seeing this monument in its current form, disfigured and monochromatic, that it was a very big challenge. There are also issues of artistic freedom and technical constraints. For example, the map of Egypt is obviously not to scale. We took liberties a little in the sandbox by cutting some distances so we see the pyramids from the Lighthouse of Alexandria, when obviously this is not possible in reality. For the French Revolution, the game takes place over nearly 10 years. For technical reasons, it was difficult to show the different stages of the destruction of the Bastille, which is why it is in continual demolition throughout the game. The same goes for the presence of the tricolor flag from the beginning of the game when it hadn't yet been created, but it promotes immersion and atmosphere for foreign players and those who are not familiar with this moment in history. With changes in technology, the pressures and expectations from the fans have become much greater on the realism provided, but our choices happen with full knowledge of the facts. How does your historical research work? It's important to understand that 30 years ago, historical research was not conducted in the same way it is now. Digital resources now make it much more accessible. During my research for Unity, I uncovered an obituary from the death registers of the town of Versailles with the real François de la Sierre. Before 2014, there were no reference to this person in the digital world. For each period studied, we rely on documents, on-site research, and information from the best academic specialists. From the beginning to the end of the production of each game, the historical needs evolve. Upstream, you have to survey the period to see if it can be interesting. Then you go into the details of the characters' stories. And finally, only toward the end, we do tangible research with the graphic designers or the animations of the crowd. For ancient Egypt, NASA data was used for colorimetry. Information was also used on the changes of the Nile over the centuries. Its course was not the same as it is today. This is the kind of information we are looking for. On the other hand, when you redo 19th century London, it's less difficult to retrieve information. We try to draw as much inspiration as possible for historical reality to make the game coherent, but at the same time we use the mythology specific to each period, like those of ancient Egypt and Greece. Obviously, scientifically, it doesn't make sense to fight against deities or against the Minotaur, but it gives us the player an experience that makes sense. Are the players aware of all this research? When the job is done well, people don't notice it. There are millions of small details, such as the hundreds of different trades seen on the streets of Paris. When we show the steps of beer making in ancient Egypt, it was realized with a lot of minute details, but most players won't realize it. They will notice more the layout and the few most visible liberties, such as the plaques of the street names in Paris, which did not exist, or the color of the mailboxes in London, which were not of the time. Is Assassin's Creed a tool for learning history? It's not necessarily what we think about first, but we always ask ourselves the question of the impact of our script outline. When playing Odyssey, for example, a player can quickly see that democracy of the time has nothing to do with that of today. A person will not learn history exclusively using our games, but the games allow someone to become familiar with that periods. It is true that some teachers use our games in history classes, but we did not envision them being used in this way. That's what motivated us to create the Discovery Tour, content without violence or narrative complexities which correspond in terms of duration to a tool which can be used in the classroom and which targets the learning process recognized by current governments. Whether ancient Greece or Egypt, these are subjects studied in schools. Conversely, Assassin's Creed is the subject of historical analysis in universities. It's seen on many research sites, and not a week goes by without a student writing to me asking for details. It creates a craze and a discourse about history and video games. If there's a historical analysis created due to the game, that's great. Was the creation of the Discovery Tour, starting with Assassin's Creed Origins, a response to the criticisms of not always being historically accurate? Since the very first game, we have realized that fans love history, and many have questions about our inspirations and about historical realities. Enjoying a visit to a museum requires a minimum of knowledge. The video game is more accessible and more complete than the museum experience in some respects. A lot of fans tell us that they pass some of their exams thanks to the games, but that's not our claim at all. That being said, if we have managed to create a certain infatuation, a certain sense of familiarity with historical periods, it really is mission accomplished. We had already included historical notes in the games. The arrival of the Discovery Tour in 2018 is another step toward the return to true history. This is an opportunity to make our creations even more accessible, though an experience without combat or violence, just an exploration and encounters with characters. We started a dialogue with the world of education. In France, for example, we participated in Game for Change, and with different museums, including an escape game that took place at Les Invalides. It's far from being accepted by everyone, and sometimes is accepted slowly, but there are a lot of teachers who are spearheading the use of digital media in the classroom. Discovery Tour is used primarily in Canada, the United States, and France. It's already a great success, but we want to make it even more accessible. We have a real awareness in the learning value of what we produce. Then here's an interview with Raphael Lacoste, who's the artistic brand director of Ubisoft Montreal. How do you work on each historical period? On the artistic side, we are creating a world in which the player must be entertained. We avoid the purely literal, cold, and scientific approach as much as possible. We mainly work on the fantasy of the time machine rather than the veracity and absolute accuracy of historical reconstruction. We do our homework on historical plans and blueprints, but then we must interpret them to create emotion and entertainment. It's an enormous part that is mostly invisible because it's difficult to explain. It is linked to the talents of artists, level designers, and game designers to create a fun and flowing game. These are things we iterate on. We take a lot of references from paintings. I specifically like romantic classics for the emotion they convey through light and colors. Inspiration comes from traveling, too. Immersion is essential. It is hard to recreate a place when you haven't experienced it and felt it yourself. It is always possible to work through documents, but when you create a mangrove forest in the game, if you know what it's like to have canoed in a mangrove forest, it can provide concrete ideas about the physical and emotional aspects of the experience to pass along. The most important thing is to uncover the soul of these places. For Istanbul, for example, traveling to the Grand Bazaar, feeling the tightly packed stalls, seeing the corridors, this kind of labyrinth of profuse colors and smells is what allowed us to describe this atmosphere into Assassin's Creed Revelations. The emotion felt when entering Hagia Sophia is difficult to communicate if you have never been there, and graphically we were limited, so specifically we lit incense producing smoke while working on the light coming through windows. This allowed us to recreate a very mystical light. It was very interesting. What is the impact of constraints on the games? Technically, the player sees the world with a very wide angle of vision. It's necessary for players to see opportunities to play sideways and vertically around them. Without this optical effect, the actual scale is not interesting or impressive. You wouldn't even see the elements which can help you explore the world. So sometimes we exaggerate the proportions, even sometimes doubling the size of some buildings. The Memphis Temple pylons are 230 feet in the game. Assassin's Creed Origins instead of the 112 feet. In reality, for example, we're not necessarily going to say it, but it's done to recreate the same emotion which can be felt in front of the actual building. And that emotion would not be the same if we respected the physical reality of it. The only element not to have been reinterpreted as Origins is the Lighthouse of Alexandria, which according to the plans we studied, reached to nearly 394 feet. We try to depict emotion more than historical accuracy. Because of this wide angle of the game, we are forced to resort to specific tools, such as in a theater where one can make forced perspectives and illusions. These are things that the player will not notice, but which will contribute to the coherence of the world created. It's like special effects in movie making. A successful set creation is a creation you don't perceive. It doesn't disturb, but it is there, and there's an enormous amount of an artist's work behind it. We are not going to force a player to cross deserts for hours just to be realistic, so we must find a balance to maintain some plausibility and not fall into just placating reality. The biggest challenge is related to the brand, since there must be both physical maneuvering in the game by the characters, as well as a credible historical context. It is said that art is born from constraint. Here there are many which other games do not have. Our exploration must be able to go in all directions, both vertically and horizontally. In the organic, human, and architectural world, it's quite an artistic challenge. You must always balance the artistic desires with the requirements of gameplay, to travel back in time, to keep a coherence at the level of immersion, while having fluidity of movement. We have to work a lot on distances, for example. We have metric constraints, minimum intervals to perform jumping or climbing animations. The key is to make these constraints invisible, all while manipulating the perspective, create emotion and fun. Do the different elements making up the worlds all matter in terms of play? We work a great deal on the composition of the settings. Players do not realize this, but they are constantly brought to many points of interest. It is our exploration loop that is very important. We don't want the player to rely exclusively on the map or on GPS. We work to make sure the composition of the world attracts the player to go to certain places. For example, in Black Flag, church steeples in the distance draw us to those places, and more generally to high points. In the first Assassin's Creed, it is the minarets and more generically all the vertical elements which allow the player to discover new gaming opportunities. The composition is created around natural elements. It is not by chance that a dense forest leads to a clearing. It will allow, for example, the discovery of a hidden underwater ruin in which there will be crocodiles. We're going to place rocks with recognizable shapes, which are not just copies of reality. These are silhouettes created by artists in order to be memorable. These essential landmarks allow the player to navigate and explore worlds organically. We, of course, are not at all in a cartoon fantasy, but even when depicting more realism, we will work on contrasting effects which take shape thanks to compositions, colors, silhouettes, and atmosphere. Basically, anything that comes off as a point of contrast will subconsciously attract the player. Everything is thought out, nothing is left to chance. You don't use automation tools at all to create such a vast world? We had this debate with John Goosen, the creative director of Origins, at the very beginning of the production about the use of tools of procedural generation, whether or not they would help us create an immense world with its villages, roads, and vegetation in a totally automated way. We had to avoid ending up with a generic world that would be uninteresting and without charm. In short, a simulation which would not be exciting to create, let alone explore. We realized, though, through these discussions and reflections, that we were going to have to do almost everything by hand, especially the roads. It was essential to make sure players had beautiful views, beautiful composition, and above all, iconic elements. For example, around the corner of a path, the player comes across a large cypress tree, or near a river comes upon a group of hippopotamuses, or arrives on a spot overlooking groves of olive trees. All these elements must be memorable to create a mental map of the world for the player. Automated creation tools are used for places that are truly generic. Certain forests or some pockets of dense vegetation in the Nike Delta, for instance, but even then the overall composition and positioning are determined upstream by the artists. Obviously, for crops, we are not going to create cash stock or each stalker vine one by one. We are always anticipating a misstep regarding the reality of monuments and cities. Credibility and realism should not be confused. Every place must have a soul. It is much more important to create a place that has a soul rather than a place that just resembles reality. That's why we decided to put the Cathedral of Havana in Black Flag when it wasn't there during the time of the game. It is an iconic element which is part of the collective and conscious of the players. The same goes for the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople with its 4 minarets, whereas it is known that at the time of the game there was one under construction and another destroyed. The spire of Notre Dame de Paris, which unfortunately has now disappeared, dates to the 19th century, several decades after the French Revolution, but we were still decided to integrate it into Assassin's Creed Unity because the players would not recognize the monument without this element. On ancient temples, we seek the feeling of truth in terms of structure. We work on the intils, the pediments, we work out the logic of their construction, even if in the end we might adjust the height of the columns and the perspective. When we rebuilt 19th century London, we certainly have the photographs, and it's a big challenge for the artists because in the end, everyone has seen the photos, everyone can compare, and the fans can certainly see them too. This complicates the staging effects a great deal. We see the level of involvement of our fans when some of them compare their homes with the buildings reproduced in the game. But it's important to remember we are not making a documentary. Working on an era closer to our own makes it hard to cheat. For Black Flag and the piracy in Jamaica, there is almost nothing left from that era. The comparison is less clear, so we could play much more with the fantasy aspect. Do technological developments in gaming consoles have an impact on the artistic work? Certainly since the first Assassin's Creed on PlayStation 3, expectations have increased a great deal, but it's a global movement in the video game industry. Just look at GTA 5 with its incredible achievement and richness. It pushes us to work to this depth even more. New technologies make it possible to be both more detailed and more abundant in what is represented. For me, the most important thing is light. We treat sunlight with an automatic effect according to the materials. For example, the red of a wall will reflect onto the ground. We now have a wealth of technology which allows for unique and scalable renderings. This adds a lot to the experience. I was in charge of the lighting of the very first Assassin's Creed. I made different atmospheres for each city to give them a special and unique hue. Damascus was very hot, so the color was more yellow. Masyaf, blue and gray. Acropolis, therefore, used blue and white. It was very interesting, but it was a bit of a static approach. Now we are working on simulations in 24-hour cycles. The days are not the same thanks to the addition of a weather system. Overcast skies, stormy or blue skies, all influence the atmosphere. In fact, light impacts everything, like the shadows cast from clouds onto the ground, for example. All these things allow us to create very strong effects of change while remaining in the same world. We could say that there is less control, but in fact we are helped by the technology which gives us a first simulation pass, and then we intervene by modifying some parameters, colors, effects, so that every hour of the day is simulated but designed in an atmosphere we have determined. We can work in great detail, but in an open world game like Assassin's Creed, you can't provide as much detail as in a game with linear gameplay. When everything is on the line, everything is perfectly controlled, everything can be anticipated. It's almost an interactive movie, in fact. The player is on a track. In Assassin's Creed, we're in what's called sandbox mode. Our challenge is very different. And that is the book, Assassin's Creed Vault. And it comes with, it looks like a map, a little pull-out map, which I'm not going to, for Valhalla, actually. Yeah, Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Comes with a Valhalla map. And on the back, the town of Henthorpus in Schottenheimer, the otherworldly and mystical Alfwood in Gloucester, Stonehenge, the iconic standing stone site, is located in Hampshire, Eivor arriving in Winchester, Wessex, Hadrian's Wall, the ancient Roman fortification in northern Yorkshire, Eivor settlement Ravensthorpe, located in the middle of Mercia, the city of London in Oxfordshire, and the Seven Sisters Cliffs in Sussex. Driven from Norway by wars and dwindling resources, Eivor, a legendary Viking warrior, is leading a clan of Norse soldiers across the icy North Sea to the rich lands of England's broken kingdoms. As the Vikings begin to settle in their new home, they encounter resistance from the Saxons, including King Alfred of Wessex, who denounces them as heathens and looks to be the sole ruler of a civilized England. Over their journey, Eivor and the Raven clan travel through Britain's various regions, building an army, gathering allies, and growing their settlement. From the fjords of Norway to the beautiful lush lands of East Mercia, to the mountainous landscapes of West Mercia and the marshlands of East Anglia, to the memorable cities of London, Jorvik, or Winchester, Assassin's Creed Valhalla's world is a fascinating one to explore. And that is it, guys. Maps, battlegrounds, and architecture of the Assassin Brotherhood. Includes exclusive removable Assassin's Creed Valhalla poster. The age-old conflict between the Brotherhood of Assassins and the Templar Order has transported millions of Assassin's Creed players through time and around the globe, providing a means to walk through the past and experience world history in a first-hand immersive way. From the time of the Crusades to the French Revolution, from ancient Greece and Egypt through Renaissance-era Italy, the echoes of this secret war resonate across the entire planet. At stake is the total control of humanity. Throughout the pages of this richly illustrated atlas are previously unpublished maps, plans, and drawings to take readers on a voyage within the world of Assassin's Creed like never before. Guillaume Delande is the author of numerous reference books on the Assassin's Creed universe, including Assassin's Creed Graphics, published by Hachette Heroes and translated into several languages. Rocio Espin-Pinar is a Spanish illustrator specializing in architectural drawings. She has created never-before-published cross-sections specifically for this book. I appreciate everyone watching, and we will see you next time, guys.